Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this special format bonus episode, I meet Isaac Watson, Vice President of Retail, Fire and Flower, leading technology-powered adult-use cannabis retailer. A retail veteran since joining Fire and Flower in April of 2018, he's built and led teams to open and acquire 85-plus locations across Canada. Isaac is a speaker at the RCC Retail Cannabis Forum coming up May 13th, and I ask him for 2 starts, 1 stop, based on what he has learned and experienced over the past year of the COVID era and beyond. Isaac, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for joining me. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in person at Retail Council of Canada's upcoming Retail Cannabis Forum, which I have the pleasure of hosting, and we have the pleasure of hosting you. So thanks again for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. Give listeners both a bit of an insight into who you are and a bit about Fire and Flower, though we've had Nadia and we've had some other guests on. So, my listeners are well acquainted in some ways, but, you can always learn more about such a dynamic business. Let's jump right in. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself, who you are, what you do, and the overview of Fire and Flower.
I'm the Vice President of Retail Operations and Warehousing at Fire and Flower. So we see ourselves as a leading retailer powered by technology in the adult use cannabis market. I joined Fire and Flower back in April of 2018. So I was part of the business before legalization even occurred, and helped to both come up with the original concepts in how our stores would look, feel, as well as getting the teams in place to operate, which is now almost 85 locations across Canada. So for us at Fire and Flower, really started coming at cannabis from the world of education. So how do we get everyone used to this new legalized world and get them acquainted with the products, as well as bring them onto our digital platforms to ensure that we were best able to understand what were the demands of our customers and guests and how we would best service them over time. Prior to joining Fire and Flower, I've probably worked in retail since I was about 13 years old. I've worked at Best Buy, Staples. I've consulted for a variety of independent retailers, and I spent the better part of 9 years at Lululemon helping take them public and then building out their international operations, and spent a lot of time working in their product team.
Right on. So you saw a lot of growth there. So you're familiar with growth trajectories. I guess, is that what attracted you to Fire and Flower, into the cannabis retail industry, the growth it was about to go through? It's probably pretty exciting for someone with your background.
Yeah, I think for myself, as I weighed kind of joining the business at the time, I was running several companies. And so there was a team, that I was responsible for. And I absolutely loved those that team and everything that they were doing. But for me, I've been a fan of cannabis for a long time, and I kind of knew innately that, as legalization came around, that it would probably be a good fit, both in terms of understanding the wide variety of, what needs to occur cross-functionally within a growing retailer, what's necessary, but also just a lot of fun on, let's make an industry together, right? Yeah. It's not very often that opportunity arises. And so when all the pieces fit together, I hopped on board, and it's really been a rocket ride ever since.
Yeah, no kidding. I often say that, during these COVID times when there's, one day you're open, one day you're closed, one day you're restricted, one day you're illegal, one day you're essential. No better group of individuals than cannabis retailers, because you're used to that anyway. You're used to that kind of dynamic back and forth. It must have been an interesting ride. When you thought about, as you said, you joined back in April 2018. So when you thought about the store design, when you had a blank sheet in front of you and your colleagues, how did you approach that? What were your first thoughts around, where to go? I mean, it's not like you had customers to begin with. As you said, it's a very unique opportunity. You knew, lots of customers, but not in the retail context. What was your first thoughts on that blank page?
Well, I think what we knew at the beginning was that, let's say, the cannabis community and those that were using both in the illicit and kind of gray markets was really a mosaic of customers coming from every walk of life. It was hard to really pinpoint who they were. There's obviously the stereotypes that exist out there, but I think even kind of looking around, let's say the boardroom table at that time, those, it was pretty hard to accept those stereotypes just given who was in that room.
Sure.
And we knew that we were going to have to show up in a strong way early on, in that no one really knew what this looked like. Keep in mind, in April 2018, we didn't even know what the packaging of cannabis would look like. Right. So, I mean, you're trying to design stores, figuring out fixtures and what you're going to place where, when you don't even know what that product is. And the clarification from the various provinces on even something like smell jars or something. So for us, it was really about taking a broad view, knowing that there was going to be some of the past ways of thinking about cannabis that would enter thinking, for example, sativa indica, what would that be? But also for a new user that maybe had never tried it before, and that would really, in their minds, had decided that they weren't going to use an illicit substance, that we were going to have to be able to talk to them in a different way. So coming at it from what was the problem that cannabis was going to solve, as an example. So we came at that from a lens of determining kind of the highest, or what would be the effects that customers would be asking for, and then curated both our visual merchandising and assortments against those effect categories, as well as layered in all the other elements that we would need to think about. But that was how we approached it early on. And, as I remember back to kind of those early, very, ideation days. Yeah. We went through the cycle many times before we landed on something that we were very excited about in our concept store that we developed on Jasper Avenue in Edmonton. It was featured in New York Times. There was a lot of hoopla about it. We had a chance to invite many regulators from across the country, and so they could start to even really sense, what could a cannabis store look like as they worked through the summer to finalize their regulations. And through those conversations, through the open houses we had with the public, we started to refine and hone in on what would ultimately be the concept that we rolled out initially primarily in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and later on Manitoba, Ontario, Yukon, and soon will be in British Columbia as well.
Did you go down south to the U.S. to look at any of the legalized dispensaries or cannabis retailers out there? There's some pretty wild concepts. When you find yourself in Vegas, there's some pretty enormous kind of concepts, as everything is in Vegas. Did any thoughts came out of that when you did some touring?
Absolutely, yeah. I've spent time in Washington State, so going through Seattle, down to Portland, into throughout California, even New Orleans. I've so a lot of time there. But I have to say, even moving the U.S. market aside, even in Vancouver Island as an example, there was a lot of medical dispensaries and kind of gray market dispensaries that really had beautiful concepts and beautiful stores, and all of that kind of came together to act as a bit of, gave us a bit of a chance to sense on, these ideas that we have, are they really innovative? Is someone else doing them? Or can we learn something that others are doing and that we see replicated in lots of places, maybe a best practice that we should be thinking about? Keep in mind in the US, it's not all essentially packaged goods there. Many of it is bulk products that they're then just bagging in store. So a little bit different than what we do here in Canada. But absolutely, it was informative in our design process.
Now, with your background, Best Buy and Lululemon, there would probably be like A, B, and C format stores. When I talk to cannabis retailers, the real estate you wound up with can be so varied that it must have been hard to kind of create a single template. Do you have kind of one or two or three different templates of the same theme that you execute across the country?
Well, I would say we're probably honing. Well, there's a variety, and it's not like there's a consistent box that exists in the real estate world. Right. Early on, we had really formalized our concept around an 1,800 square foot location. So essentially almost boutique in a way, something that was small, manageable, relatively fair lease costs that, we thought, given the volume projections we had, that we'd be able to be profitable against. But as time went on, we started to figure efficiencies, and we started to be able to diminish the space requirements necessary. And so now we've really honed into, closer to that 1,400, 1,500 square foot location becomes more of our standard. And we have different finishing types based on both, what we see as volume, and we can talk about it later, but also the banner. We now are operating multi-banners. Right. And then we have our small concept model that we launched with Alimentation Couche-Tard beside two of their Circle K locations last summer. And those stores are 470 square feet. So again, there's this kind of let's say 1,500 square foot site and then this, let's say 500 square foot site. And we're now optimizing both of those models to ensure that we're able to be as productive and profitable as possible, while at the same time ensuring an amazing customer experience, because at the end of the day, it's the guest and the customer that, this is all about, right? That's why we're all here. And our hope is to do the best we can to conveniently and with education in mind, get the right products into the hands of customers consistently. So it's been interesting to play on the concept models. Now, I think over time that could evolve further, but right now that's where we stand, and it's been a lot of hard work to get to that level, and I think we're very happy with where we are today.
So let's tap into a bit of that experience, and in this short format bonus episode, we want to just give people a sense of what's yet to come on the virtual stage, based on your experience, mostly in 2020, early 2021. If you would share two things retailers should start doing from your experience, and one thing they might want to stop doing, something maybe you didn't no longer do or you see them doing, what would those be? And
there may be other guests that you're having on this podcast that'll reiterate this, but I think we're in a world of digital. We're not confined to the four walls of a store to interact with our customers. I mean, we're interacting with them on their desktop computers and everywhere they go on their mobile devices. And so if you're not thinking about how you best interact with them and show up where they are and offer a service model that makes it easy for them to place an order quickly and efficiently and get the products they're looking for, I think it would be worthwhile spending some time there. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the other things that product formats have been changing dramatically. There's there's kind of net new categories that began at the beginning of last year. That has evolved. There's ever more products coming out all the time. Some of the original brands have diminished. Others have really brought themselves to the forefront. So I think really understanding what is your mix of kind of, let's say, value-based versus premium products is really important, because it's very easy to get your cash all tied up into inventory. And regardless of how, what any of us or anyone says, cannabis doesn't get better over, lengthy periods of time. Right. And not that you can't bring it back to life with a little bit of moisture, but most customers aren't going to do that. So I think it's really important to focus on how you're turning your product through the door. All right.
And one thing maybe you don't do anymore, or you see retailers doing that maybe they shouldn't be.
I'm still scratching my head a little bit on these very large square foot locations. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it's, given what the amount of competition that exists in the Canadian market now, I think retailers really need to think hard about how much space they're going to take on. And does that make sense when you look at the bottom line? And what is your risk profile? So I think that's a really important, thinking process to go through at the beginning of getting into a lease.
That's a great one. All right, so you're on the virtual stage joining us May 13th. What are you going to be talking about?
So Neil Klassen from 7 Points Interiors we're going to be in a discussion about the balancing act of growth and retail. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of things, everything from in-store experience to fixturing to product assortments to and likely also some of the things that you do at various stages after you open to kind of be building up your customer base. So I hope that the retailers out there find some benefit in maybe some lessons or maybe some places where we disagree. And nonetheless, I think that'll be a good point of kind of introspection and hopefully some advancement for the retailers that are participating. So.
Well, listen, Isaac, thanks again for joining me. This has been, as I said, a short preview bonus introduction, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. It's close to my heart in terms of understanding the retail execution and operations, and retail wouldn't be the same without it. So thanks again for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast, and I wish you a great rest of your week.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. If you are a retail cannabis retailer or industry professional, you don't want to miss the RCC Retail Cannabis Forum that I have the pleasure of hosting May 13th. Learn more and register at www.retailcouncil.org/events. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc., And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.